Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into a truly gripping, highly emotional narrative today. We're going to unpack a story that perfectly captures a massive societal shift, this intense, almost explosive clash between modern financial independence and rigid patriarchal control, all playing out within a traditional household. It's a story about generations, about heavy expectations, and ultimately about breaking a deeply toxic cycle. So, let's get right into it.
Women are the footwear of men and belong tightly in their fists. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. This absolutely chilling quote is delivered by the family matriarch Dadi Sa, and it immediately sets up the shocking core conflict of our story today. Right out of the gate, we know exactly what her worldview is. She represents this older, unyielding system where women are seen merely as subjects to be controlled, rather than actual, equal partners in a family.
So, it makes you wonder, right? How exactly does a perfectly happy dual-income household completely fall apart in just a matter of days? Because at the start of this narrative, this home was actually thriving. The women were getting along great, the finances were solid, and there was genuine peace. And yet, the arrival of just one person carrying all that heavy weight of traditional expectations completely shatters that harmony. Let's look at exactly how this unravels. All right, let's look at Section 1. The calm before the storm. Okay, picture this really stark contrast. The source describes an old household, the dynamic the older generation was totally used to. It was characterized by constant fear and subservience. I mean, to the horrifying extent that women actually bearing physical bruises was just normalized as a sign of a husband's control. But then you look at the new household. Mina, the daughter-in-law, and her mother-in-law have completely flipped the script. They are mutually supporting one another. They're both working, they're earning their own money, and they are living happily, completely without fear. It is a really beautiful progression. But as we'll see, that peace doesn't last, which brings us to Section 2, the threat of independence. You know, the narrative points out some very specific triggers that blew this piece wide open. Actions that were meant to be loving were suddenly reframed by the men as deep, personal insults to their authority. For example, the women were earning their own money through a boutique. The mother-in-law even took her own savings and bought her husband a brand new car for his birthday. He had ridden a scooter for years. On top of that, the women were finally speaking up with confidence. But to the men, and especially to the visiting matriarch Dadi Sa, this was definitely not seen as success. No way. This was viewed as a complete and total loss of unquestioned male dominance. It's crazy how often a positive shift in someone's independence is perceived as a direct threat by someone who's just used to being in control. And to really grasp why they reacted so poorly, we have to talk about how the concept of tradition, or parampara, is utilized here. The narrative explicitly shows tradition not as some beautiful cultural celebration of heritage, but literally as a deliberate weapon for subjugation. Dadi Sa and her son Manglu use that word tradition simply to justify keeping women strictly within their limits and under absolute physical and emotional control. Which leads us directly into Section 3, enforcing patriarchal control. Dadi Sa doesn't just complain, she executes this highly manipulative, three-step plan to get control back. First, she taunts her son Manglu, intentionally making him feel weak just because his wife is independent. Second, she explicitly reminds him of the good old days of tradition, where physical control, literally meaning a bruised wife, was the gold standard of a well-run home. And third, perhaps the most destructive move of all, she turns her grandson, Niraj, against his own working wife, Mina, poisoning what was previously a very supportive marriage. Listen to this specific phrase Dadi Sa uses to shame her son, Manglu. It is better to ride a cycle with pride than to drive a car like a dog. Think about the context for a second. The mother-in-law bought that car as a loving birthday gift, but the matriarch manages to twist this incredible act of female financial independence into a symbol of absolute male emasculation. She essentially convinces her own son that accepting a gift bought with a woman's money reduces him to the status of a dog. And tragically, this manipulation works almost instantly, resulting in immediate verbal and physical abuse. When the mother-in-law simply speaks up to defend Mina, Manglu slaps her across the face. Dadi Sa literally reminisces out loud, saying it used to bring her satisfaction to see her daughter-in-law covered in black and blue bruises because it proved she was under control. And the grandson, Niraj, completely brainwashed by this ideology. He orders Mina to immediately resign from her boutique so she can come home and cook for his friends. It is a full-scale, aggressive attempt by both the father and the son to force these women back into submission. But right when things look their darkest, we hit Section 4, breaking the generational curse. The story brilliantly illustrates the mother-in-law's incredible evolution here. We are talking about a woman who endured abuse silently for years. She was kept entirely under her husband's thumb. But then, she learns independence from her daughter-in-law, Mina. She starts earning her own money. She buys the car. And finally, in the ultimate test of her growth, she doesn't just protect herself, she stands up to her own son, Neeraj, to protect Mina from being abused the exact same way she was. During the climax of the story, the mother-in-law delivers this phenomenal defense. She says, "It is a mother who teaches her son to respect women. A mother teaching her son to beat his wife is a disgrace." She directly, unapologetically challenges the toxic teachings of Dadi Saw. She draws a hard line right there in the sand, stating that she will absolutely not allow her son to disrespect or abuse his wife, completely shattering that ancient cycle of older women enabling the abuse of younger women. And Mina immediately backs her up with this powerful statement. A true queen raises her son like a prince, so he learns to respect other women. This is so important because it shows an unbreakable front of female solidarity. Instead of that tired, traditional trope where the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law are constantly pitted against each other by the patriarchy, they completely unite. They redefine what family pride actually looks like, rooting it entirely in respect rather than fear. So faced with this incredibly united front, the older matriarch's power completely dissolves. Dadi Saw is finally forced to confront her own toxic legacy. The story concludes with her apologizing. She realizes that false pride and controlling women don't bring a family honor. Instead, she admits that respecting women is what brings true prosperity and wisdom into the home, which the narrative symbolizes beautifully through the goddesses Lakshmi for wealth and Saraswati for knowledge. It is such a powerful resolution to an incredibly tense conflict. And I want to leave you with this final thought to really reflect on. The source material argues that true tradition brings prosperity and wisdom, not subjugation. So take a look at your own household dynamics and ask yourself, are your family traditions building respect, or are they just building fear? Thank you so much for joining me for today's Explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.